Good evening. I hope you had a fantastic week. Thank you so much for making the time for This Is the Day. My name is Medrin Nyambura. So 2 days ago, the 17th of October, was International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. We started this conversation on radio looking at countries that are struggling with poverty and how Kenya may get there if we do not pay attention. But don't let me tell you, let's have Leonard Wanyama, who's the coordinator, East Africa and Governance Network, talk to us about it. Hi, Leonard.
Hello, how are you?
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
I love the colors. We sort of had a code. We talked about it.
Thank you.
We're in the spirit. Karibu sana.
Yes, asante.
When we talk about poverty, and I was telling you, like even on radio when I shared it, somebody felt maybe it was a bit too extreme. But how can you define poverty so that the person watching and listening can understand what that is?
Well, in simple terms, according to organizations such as the UN, it's about the number of people living below a certain threshold.
Okay.
For some time, it was the $2 a day. But in terms of policy making, each country then looks at its economy and decides what that threshold really is. So in the case of Kenya, we have done that and set it aside. So we know poverty in the rural area and we know poverty in the urban area. And we say, for instance, in the rural area, the overall poverty is those people living below 3,252 shillings. That's their life. That's where every expenditure, food, water, everything is below that. In terms of the urban areas, it's 5,995 shillings.
Is this per month?
This is per month.
Per month, okay.
Yes,
so in the rural areas, it's 3,000?
3,000.
Per month?
Per month.
Seriously?
Everything is, so all his expenditures, including fees, everything is within that. So it's below that threshold. That's a poor person.
Wait. Okay,
Yeah.
We have people who pay that much for Zuku or
Exactly.
their internet every month.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I liked how you separated the rural poverty, urban poverty. So looking at Kenya, which one is more extreme?
So in that sense, then rural poverty is the issue. If you think about our histories, there have been areas that had been marginalized and things like that. A good chunk of Kenyans live in the rural areas. And so the prevalence is mostly in those areas.
Okay.
And that's where you see it. You can see, for instance, in the urban setting. That's why people come to the urban setting, because of the experience of poverty there is worse than the experience of poverty in an urban area.
Okay.
Maybe you have a bit more options. And so that's maybe influencing things like migration.
Okay.
So that's to deal with it in a policy sense. You kind of separate that so that you can be very specific.
Okay,
Yeah.
I hear you. What would you say is the cause of poverty? Because what worries me with our country is that for a very long time, education was the way out.
Yeah.
When we had functional institutions, when a higher education guaranteed a job. But that's not the case today.
Yeah.
So how did we get here?
Well, there are a number of things. So historically, obviously, there's the policy, right? Maybe, for instance, maybe the lack of proper implementation of that.
Okay.
But also the policy did certain things like kind of ignoring certain areas. So for instance, the pastoralist areas were looked at low productivity, and the investment into those areas was very minimal compared to what we call the agricultural high productive areas. So that created some spatial or geographic inequality.
Okay.
And differences. But over the years, there are a number of things. Unemployment, if you think about how our population has been growing and the fact that we are not creating as much jobs in tandem with the way the population is growing. So unemployment is one of those things. Lack of education, things like political instability. So you can imagine a family that has been living a certain level of life, and then they're disrupted, whether it is a clash of whatever kind or some. Yeah, so that obviously brings you down
Okay.
to the poverty levels. And maybe if you push it a bit further, things like corruption. So you're mismanaging huge amounts of money rather than putting it to deliver services.
Okay.
Yeah, so that then has kind of compounded the problem of poverty in this country.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you say that, I remember when, every time you read an article that Kenya is an emerging economy, Kenya is the fastest growing middle class sub-Sahara, and I'm thinking, I get that, but then there's somebody else who's really struggling to even put food on the table.
Yes.
So mismanagement of funds, what we call corruption, and there's a pastor who said we should stop calling it corruption and call it theft.
Yes.
Is that the reason why on one hand you have people becoming richer by the day and on the other hand you have poor people?
Yes, that's a factor. So for instance, you have someone who takes a lot of money out of here, maybe, or out of service delivery.
Okay.
And then he then gets to a certain level where he has the amount of money where he can keep generating more money for himself.
Yes.
But you see, those who are dependent on public services have a crumbling system that has no investment in it.
Okay.
So that is a factor, obviously. It can work that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at other countries like Asia and India, people like China who've beaten us to the game because they used to have a high level of poverty, but they seem to have reduced them. And also the fact that they're coming to help us as Africa is very questionable. But how did they beat us?
Well, this is a question of prioritization, and you have to make certain decisions when you're in leadership or as a government. It's something of what will we do to get out of this poverty and sticking to it. There has to be serious commitment and political will in that regard. So for instance, let's take the example of Singapore. This is a classic case where people, it's a simple thing, is like, for instance, they say democracy is a luxury, we'll have it last.
Okay.
But as you can look at things in Singapore, it's like they're experimenting or working towards it, right? China, it's like that time they're just like, no democracy. You see, so you make that decision.
Okay.
Then if you turn to maybe the West or America and whatnot, this is like, these things will work in tandem, right?
Oh, yes.
And you see, for instance, for countries that this happened to them later, it was a question of we are trying to engineer leapfrogging into a better space. So that's why they prioritize that way, and then we get there.
Okay.
Now, in comparison to Kenya, I think we have a sense that we want things to work in tandem. And so whether it is the old discussions we had with the founding fathers, or currently now, we always seem to get to a point where these things have to work in tandem, considering it's a question of context.
Okay.
So I think that's the difference. It's the how you prioritize and then sticking to that. Maybe I would say they beat us because of the commitment now. Yeah, their commitment to that is for us, we keep shifting the goalposts on the commitment angle.
I agree.
Yeah.
Do you know what I learned? That in China, it's actually explained what the goal is, that every citizen understands what the goal is.
Yes.
Then we asked amongst ourselves, what's the goal for Kenya? And everybody could only say 2030.
Yes.
So do you feel like it's not communicated exactly what the government wants to achieve? Because I know the big four, now it's a bit clear, but sometimes we have no idea where we're headed.
Well, I think it's communicated to the best of the institutions in charge ability.
Okay.
That is done. But that's not the issue for me. It's not about communication and everyone knowing. It's about commitment.
Okay.
So you have institutions that should deliver issue A, but it's not happening. That's the problem. So for instance, you say you want to have facilities, hospitals, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah. You allocate certain amount for that, and then that money disappears. Or, so obviously there's no commitment there. This happens across the world. Even China right now is dealing with corruption, right? They are taking it very seriously. You might have heard of the Interpol officer who just got arrested because his case is something that is building from the past.
Okay.
Yeah, so that commitment, if you say you want a hospital that needs facilities for 2 million shillings, then you get that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, for instance, on the other side now, the citizenry get upset because on that other end they don't see the hospital. So that's it's mainly just the issue of commitment.
Okay, I hear you. Also, do you think as Kenyans we understand where we are at in regards to the levels of poverty? Because it's easy when you're seated in an office. It's very easy. When fuel goes up by 7 shillings, you can afford it.
Yeah.
When tomatoes go up by 5 bob, it's fine. But do we understand where we are at?
Not really. I don't think, because we are very individualistic. So people keep to their own. And getting people together to kind of champion these things is not an easy job. So you hear the grumbling, and then maybe the experiences, but then the real sense of how this could affect them, I don't think Kenyans have a good perspective on that.
Okay.
So if you take, for instance, the issue of the finance bill, there are lots of issues in there. But this is something they could have picked up early, or actually should think of it next year, because you'll still have another tax debate next year come budget season. So yeah, so now it's like attention shifts from time to time.
Okay.
But of course, on a day-to-day, they do see the pinch, they do feel the pinch and how things are progressively getting more difficult for them. So they do feel it, but the sense of how quickly things could turn for them, it's only when they're in that situation.
Okay.
Yeah, but in terms of just long-term thinking that this thing isn't as good as it is, they don't really, because people are keeping to their own business.
I blame the apartments. But also, let me ask, do you think the poor person is more conscious of what you're talking about right now, the shift, as opposed to people who can afford the basic needs?
Yeah, I would say poor people in this country are probably more conscious of such issues. And maybe this is why you can see their reaction is mainly violent, because that's when they feel that's the best way to express themselves very quickly.
Okay.
So, and they are the majority, by the way.
People forget that.
They are the majority, and people don't understand how many more poor people exist even in their day-to-day lives. Like, you could actually just find out that you're poor in between an hour or so. You never know.
Who told you my story?
No.
I'm kidding.
Well,
I'm kidding.
You might be doing your budgets and then you realize,
Yes.
hey, per month I'm below the threshold. So
Yes.
you never know.
Okay.
So, but poor people are much more conscious. And for instance, in my experiences, I find that's why they are quick to be in elections, whether it's in the voting of nominations or whether it's in the violence. They are the ones who do all these things, not the comfortable people. Yeah.
And then now that's when the middle class is accused to have a lot of apathy when it comes to policy making and politics.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, but it's who the shoe pinches, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's listen to Jordan Feliz. What? Feliz. What is the Waru Nation happening today? The song is The River, and we're going to talk about more on how we can sort this out. And please don't make fun that I said R. We're not doing that today. We're live on Family TV, also live on Family Radio, just trying to understand poverty and how to get rid of it. Jed, might I say you're one of my best people, and just saying, loving the conversation. Apart from poverty, we are now dealing with a demotivated citizenry and a situation where you go to work yet you can't account for any productivity because you literally did nothing at the office. This, combined with the lack of goodwill in the nation concerning leadership, is a trend that is causing the bouncing back of the economy to take longer than expected. And she wants your comment on that. There's also a young man saying, I am a young person right now and I'm not quite sure what to hope for with our country. So kindly respond to Jed. So demotivated citizens who feel like literally they can't account for anything that they're doing, and also have the lack of goodwill in the nation in concerning leadership. Okay. So we are taking quite a while to get back to where we were.
Okay. I think it's like these two are very related. You have to have a great love for your country, not to give up. For instance, in our work, it's not easy. For instance, you go speak to citizens, they slap you back in the face with not caring. So you have to really have a great love for your country. You have to have a passion for the issues. You have to stay attentive. You with any struggle, you grind to a halt, but you pick yourself up. It's a matter of passion. But in that sense, in terms of the institutions and the things in place for this, issues like public participations are the space for you not to lose hope. And this, for instance, what you're talking about is mainly policy at this point, but there's the political angle, which mainly what demotivates people.
Yes.
But you have to think about the policy stuff. So be concerned about what's going on in your neighborhood. Be concerned about, for instance, when there's a road passing, if you're asked to go participate in public participation, it's not about going there and saying something only, but maybe just showing your face there and listening to what's going on.
Okay.
So that awareness, I get a sense that people don't normally have that awareness.
Okay.
There's an example that Nairobi had public participation some weeks back, and a colleague who attended discovered that there were mainly 10 people. So is it that people are too busy to go or are just not interested?
Okay.
Maybe they're not interested because of the kind of politics we have. But the 10 people went and they participated and they gave in their contributions. By law, it's very difficult to ignore that.
Okay.
There will be a document somewhere that will register this 10 participation, their views. The recommendations will be based on those 10 people's views. And what comes out of this may be good or bad, but those views are hard. So you can't really give up on this. And I always urge people, just take whichever way you participate publicly, whether it's in church, whether it's in school committees and whatnot. It's the same thing when it comes to kind of this policy and government processes.
Okay.
Yeah.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking of the county hall tradition, the culture that's there, especially in the Western. They give their views. People will, call their governor and say, these are the problems we have.
Yeah, the county hall. Yeah.
The county hall meetings. So we obviously have counties. So that could happen. Is it that we don't know or we don't care?
So there is not knowing.
Okay.
And there's not caring. But this is something that's evolving. So for instance, despite that, Nairobi County, for instance, is working on a way that will encourage more people to go. They have made, I think, some guidelines. They are getting help to improve that. But also there is a question on how to announce these things and get people interested.
Okay.
So which spaces? Traditionally it has always been noticed in the Kenya Gazette. But you see over time there is the publication of things on WhatsApp groups, on the internet, or sharing on Facebook and all this. So for instance, the digital platform has allowed a new form of interaction, which, for instance, the government is still working on how to get people involved through that.
Okay.
So that's the situation.
So the online would work?
The online does work. I think you get, I'm sure like now people are waiting, maybe there could be an extra day, thanks to the fact that the holiday is tomorrow. So, but we all get that notice through WhatsApp. So you
That's
see
true.
that so you can see that that's working.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's that. There's how to communicate to people. But there's also the interest. So think about the day people will be having public participation and what is a clashing issue on their schedule. So do you go to work or do you go for?
My friend, you go to work because you need to pay that tax.
Exactly. So this is something they'll have to figure out to see how it works.
Okay.
Before this, we had the Chiefs Baraza, which was and that worked. And so let's see how does that evolve within the county's government. So this is a work in progress.
Okay. I had so much hope with the county assemblies, but it's okay. We are here. When you talk about online, I get so much hope because if you can remember when the price of power went up, people complained on social media for days.
Yes.
And at least some attention was paid to that. So maybe there's hope with the online space.
Yeah.
Let's look at something that has been talked about quite a lot, but it might be also one of the causes of poverty in this country.
Yeah.
Colonial histories.
Yes.
I don't know, how did the white colonialists leave and then we are still here and there are people in Pokot, in Lodwar who still don't have food?
Well, it was the structure based on their interest. Their interest was very extractive, right? Get as much produce out of this country, sell on the world market. That was it. We inherited this, and obviously because of our politics, for instance, you would maintain that structure for your benefit.
Okay.
or fiddle with it just enough to fit your politics, but generally not think of it as a whole. So that was a political question. It still is. We've evolved from that. So in thinking about inequality, then you hear the discussions about marginalization, the policy making around it. So you have the arid and semi-arid lands policy under Kibaki and kind of things does that. We have the new constitution bringing in new institutions like the CRA, Commission for Revenue Allocation, that talks about marginalization. So again, think about which counties and how we are going to allocate. And then now, this has improved now. It's not about counties. Now they're thinking of marginalization to the ward level. Because in Nairobi, there are areas that are marginalized.
That's true.
In Bungoma, there are areas that are marginalized. So you find out which areas those are and then take resources there and try to develop those projects there that will help improve people's lives.
Okay.
So
Also,
that's so for us, we've been working through trying to stop marginalization, right? So the policy as it is, in fact, if you think of it in terms of the CRA discussion on marginalization and the money allocation, that's how it's being addressed.
Okay.
But then it's not all gloom and doom in that regard. Marginalization discussion has helped, and through devolution actually, it has helped because you realize that rural poverty is decreasing much faster than urban poverty.
That's some good news.
Yeah, so that is happening. So
Okay.
you find the fact that you've had this thing about Wajir having their first cesarean.
Yes.
It is a big deal. When I go home and I saw street lights in my village,
Yes.
it was very interesting because now you could see the tomato traders staying like at least until something like 8:30.
Okay.
Which is in a very remote place. And it's very interesting. Now, that extra 2 hours is extra cash made. So you improve someone. It's 2 hours per day. Then if you calculate that per month, per year, that's a big difference compared to when at 6, they had to go home.
Okay.
So that's how it's been playing out.
What I like about what you're saying is because even all these other countries, it wasn't magic. It's basically making it easy for the person in their context.
Yeah.
And I feel that's where we get lost. But also we've sort of alluded to politics for a while. And there's the issue of minority making a decision for the majority, where because of the numbers in regards to our tribalistic politics, we have a few people who make the decision for the many.
Yeah.
Can we get away from that?
Well, those are political decisions, and when you say the few, I wouldn't know exactly who you mean. Are you speaking about specific individuals, or are you
Leonard,
speaking
I'm
about
trying to
systems?
keep us on air. No, I'm talking about how our leadership seems to go around. It's just one circle, and it's just that the
a
few
clique
people.
of
It's just a
people.
clique of people.
Okay, that's now politics. But then, in their pursuit of power, there's always that in some form or the other. If you take the Democratic Party, you can see what happened to Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In the Kenyan context, it always happens through the nominations nights going between how parties are merging. So, but then there's one fundamental question. Our decision to implement a new constitution is very clear that Kenya wants to be a democratic country. And second, there has to be the involvement of the citizens. So yeah, in the big picture of the big politics, people are seeing and looking at a small clique. But there is significant power in the fact that it's diffused. You have very many decision makers. Not to support the fact that we have 47 counties, but there is a certain acceptance that even with all these leaders from MCS, they may be dubious, but they are people's leaders. They elected them. They can hold them accountable. So you know this MCA here, he's joking, I know his house, I'll go there. I'll stomp his door until he explains to me at the very least.
Yes.
We hope he doesn't go and like hit the MCA because that's criminal.
No, don't do that. Yes.
There is that semblance of, I know with direct democracy, I can hold this person to account. We've seen it. Like one of the very interesting things was then the issue of former governor of Kiambu,
Okay.
Yeah, it could have been maybe an issue of propaganda, but you see the aspect of, as they said, that the ladies were saying, how could you call us that? Or whatever,
The woman vote.
Yeah, so they directly, and this was not even at the election, this was at nomination.
Yes.
Whatever it is, there is that direct link that Kenyans don't want to let
lose.
go.
Yeah.
They know that it's direct. I chose this person, good or bad, and so yeah, it's very clear that they want that direct democracy. So at the very least, even if people are kind of mobilizing as a clique at the top, they will have to execute this one way or the other by going back to the populace.
Okay.
So you will have to do this whether you want a referendum or you want an election, but you remove that direct democracy aspect, you'll be in trouble with Kenyans.
And I feel like that's what they don't understand, because when we got the figures, we don't have money for a referendum. But that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
Even when you talk about that the power is closer to us, why do they want to merge the counties? I'm like, I am not understanding. Why, if we merge the counties, do we lose that where you're in touch with your leadership?
Well, for that we'll have to go back to history. If you ask me what is a merged county, it's what was called a former province.
Yes.
I think this is now something that through the process you'll know what are the reasons. Of course, there are people who just are moving and shaping things because of their interests.
Yes.
But what in terms of development, what does it really mean?
Okay.
So how it is solved is politically. So you'll have people who are against and for, and you might vote for it or not, but that decision will have to be going through a plebiscite based on our system.
I'm just happy it's going to be really hard to do it.
It's yeah, and I think these are things like if you go to the history of how we got this constitution, these are things that have all been considered. And I'd like to invite people to go to the Kenya National Archives.
Okay.
I am aware that they have audio recordings of the whole process.
Okay.
So you can listen to how you got to have an MCA, how you got to have a governor, and other than the audio recordings, there are publications there, so you can get to read, take your time and just get to know why we got here.
Okay.
So these conversations were properly archived for every committee, every single session. And you can get to hear all the voices, including whether it was delegates or experts, you'll get to hear that and get to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's amazing how it's just under our noses and you don't know that. Talking about how to eradicate poverty, let me tell you, we are learning so much. My goodness. Jed, are you taking notes with me? But then let me ask.
Yeah.
Overpopulation has also been credited to being one of the reasons we have high levels of poverty, sub-Saharan Africa. Is there a solution? Because I don't think with Magufuli's policy, our population is going anywhere. So is there a solution?
Yeah, we really have to think about that.
Okay.
We really have to think about how we plan our families. That's something that's really important. Because if you think of the fact that we have been reducing poverty over 10 years, we've reduced poverty for 200,000 people. But your population has grown 10 million people. You can see that challenge.
Yes.
So with that, then you realize then houses that are led by women, so let's say houses single parent, that's more inclined to poverty.
Okay.
Yeah. Houses that have, households that have too many children, so you have 12, are more inclined to poverty.
Okay.
Households that have less educated the head of the household, whether it's a man or woman, with very little education, very likely they're going to be struck by poverty. So we really have to think about this and have some honest discussion about it. Whether by whichever means. So of course, these discussions on population control, how contraception and whatnot, we really need to have a clear discussion about it. I think in our history, there was something like Kupanga Uzazi. That kind of campaign has just disappeared, right? So we have, of course, maybe it has been more different concerns, maybe trying to control HIV and whatnot. But the planning of families just disappeared. And so you can see in these 10 years, the way the population has just ballooned. And so it's bringing in many other challenges. So that's why maybe planning is very difficult, because if you have your mindset in a small population in terms of even designing your infrastructure. But the children you're taking through school who you're not giving jobs, the hospitals you're building that cannot sustain, like you are planning for 20 beds, but you have a population where sick people show up, you have 100 people in the hospital. That's mainly because your population is so large.
Okay.
So definitely this is a question that has to be revisited and discussed in a lot of our spaces to understand how we can plan. So this, in the next 10 years, this could probably double.
What? Including Nairobi?
Yes. So our population will continue growing.
Okay.
Unless, as they say, population is struck down by maybe catastrophe and whatnot.
Yes.
Yeah. So there are other things. So the health today is better than it was some years ago. You are giving, so this policy of universal health coverage, it'll have benefits in the future. So you have less people dying, and so you have to. I can tell you a good example. In another space, I was a lecturer. In 2016, the first class of the free primary education were doing their first years in university.
That's such a good perspective.
Yeah, so you had, that was 2003. By 2016, they are first years, they're in diploma, they're doing certificate.
Yes.
So you can see in that period, that's how you should start thinking. If you're doing a program now, think of the future and plan for that future.
Which means next year, but when they'll want jobs.
Exactly.
This class that started with...
The free primary, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and also there's another thing. This is why you find then you have very educated border riders in this country who are speaking English. You see it because of that. So you have to start thinking about things like that.
Okay.
You asked about countries like the Asian countries and China. China, whenever they're having a congress to elect their next new leader, before that there's a plan that is committed to him. So the plan is done, whether it's 50 years plan, and then it's given to him and it's for him to deliver as the leader. But the planning has already been done.
Who does the planning?
The party.
Okay. Oh, so the party comes up with a plan.
Yeah.
And this is pitched to the citizens?
Through that process, because it's from the citizens to the leadership, because it's a centralized kind of, so that is their system.
Okay.
In ours, we can do it differently, but you have to plan. So in as much as we are saying 2030, right? After this, there are benefits in 2030 that have been achieved. So what after 2030?
What's the plan after
What's
that?
the plan?
Okay.
So you really have to have proper forward thinking.
Okay. That explains why they'll have institutions where, give or take who the leader is, the systems are still there.
The systems have to work because they are now catering to those demands of the things from the past.
Okay, there's so much to learn. I feel like we're in class 2 and other people who go in first year. But there's also something that I found, and this was a professor in Japan who wrote this, and he said poverty cannot be eradicated. It can only be redistributed. So you can't really get rid of poverty. What do you think?
Well, now that's the research. But you have to make political decisions to that effect on how you're going to be redistributing. And this, for me, is a question of how you imagine your governance, how you think it can work. So it's a question of redistribution. In Kenya, mainly based on our work, we can see we are championing for more progressive taxation.
Yes.
Yeah. So
they're so painful, though.
Yeah. So progressive, it means that the rich have to pay their fair share. Okay. Yeah. At this point in time, someone, let's say, earning 100K is paying almost the same, not the same amount of tax in terms of the amount. Like if I'm paying 30% and a rich man is paying 30%, it's not the same. It's not how the same. He feels it is not like how I feel it. So we are thinking about progressive taxation. Okay. On the lower spectrum, you see like certain income levels are not taxed similarly, so that at least they can get some relief. Okay. Yeah. So in that sense, then we then do the redistribution, and that's a debate that's worldwide in terms of thinking about inequality, how to redistribute and those benefits. Okay,
that's why the rich are very happy with Trump right now. He sorted them out. But then how can we sort it? We've acknowledged where we've gone wrong, but how can we move forward and make sure that our population is not struggling with at least the basic needs that give you the dignity?
Well, that's an interesting question. we should pose it to our politicians and our policymakers on how they come about these policies. So we had a chance to take some submissions to Parliament. That's a departmental committee on finance and planning. Unfortunately, our submissions seem to have been totally ignored.
Okay.
But this process has to keep going on. In those spaces, we have to push and tell them this is what we need. And there, we could have a good chance.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a wide array of things. So the context now is that the taxes are going to increase, definitely because of paying the debt. But we have another cycle where we'll have to plan and change this. So it's and this is why I keep saying that we have to participate in these processes. Yeah, because this in this governance, the cycle is always ongoing.
Yes.
Yeah. So these spaces you always look, plug, improve. Yeah.
You just say the taxes will go ahead. Let me tell you, when I think about taxes, I even get a migraine because I'm like, there are so many. Anybody who's using internet services will tell you the email they got in the last 2 weeks with your provider telling you it will go up and it's by 300 bob.
Yeah.
Can we sort this with taxation?
Yeah, and so for instance, you also have to understand, let's take that instance of online.
Yes.
We have to have a clear understanding what online services mean to people.
Okay.
In Kenya, online services are now an essential service. So other than your basic rights, food, shelter, clothing, online is the next essential service. Yeah, and I'm not talking about Wi-Fi alone. You think of the old people who are on the National Safety Net program. They get their money through an M-Pesa.
Yes.
So the taxation on the money transfer on that has increased. So that their money is going to be chopped.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that regard, if you just take that program alone, there's a whole array. So think of digital learning.
Yes.
Yeah. So if it's supposed to be that this child buys their own bundle, it's taxed. So it's costlier. Then the time they'll spend to read on the internet, another charge. So it's a whole array. It's just unfortunate that what has happened is there's some what I call dangerous tax logic.
Okay.
Yeah, probably because of the reactionary way we are trying to deal with the debt issue, maybe. But the idea being that you imagine the internet is mainly for gambling, so we'll tax very many things based on the fact that we can look for money for gambling. You know, that seems to be what was the driving factor. And then again, you find the taxes on gambling were reduced. But what about these other things? So those dangerous tax logics are things you have to address.
Okay.
So it's not that the internet, in that case, since this is the example, is a luxury. You have to think about it in a whole array of issues.
Okay.
Yeah, so those logics are things like we have to keep engaging. We, as I said, tried speaking to Parliament about this, and it's going to be an ongoing debate. You can imagine the number of issues or stories now that are being covered about gambling and if you think about the impact to the youth, particularly young men and their lifestyles, it's how you hear these stories of someone killed his friend because of the money, or, you know, those things. Yeah. So there's spiraling effect too in that issue.
Okay.
So we have to address it that way. But the logics have to be addressed, so that you develop a proper taxation that doesn't harm, but also raises enough revenue to then go deliver services. So you appreciate, for instance, that some of the money from betting will go developing sports academies and whatnot. But then you don't want to then take that same model and then make old people suffer.
Okay.
In that safety net program, yeah.
Okay. There's something, just to follow up on that, there's something the CEO Equity Bank said. He talked about how if you want a middle-class country, you must be willing to pay for it. Why Kenyans don't feel like they're paying for a middle-class country? We feel like we're paying for money that has been looted. We're paying for loans that we did not approve of. We're paying for things we were not partisan to. Do you understand where we're coming from? When Kenyans say these taxes are too high, this is not what we asked for?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, for that, I'd pose a question for him. If even the little we have been paying has been mismanaged. Yeah. The thing is, how do we manage it? So we pay little, you mismanage it. You ask us to pay more, you mismanage it. That's very unfair, I think.
Okay.
There's been no guarantee in terms of the delivery of services. Yeah, that commitment to that has been lacking. So it then becomes very unfair to the populace. They feel like the little we give is stolen.
Okay.
And you're still saying that it's not enough.
What's not enough?
Yeah, what's not enough? Yeah, for them it feels unfair. And so, for instance, as a wealthy man, this is why he can afford to say that, because give or take, whichever way he looks at it,
okay.
he's fine. He can pay. He
Yeah.
can. In fact, what he's saying is that he's willing to pay more.
Okay.
Maybe I'd see it that way, but it doesn't feel a pinch. But you increase for some people the price of a tomato by 10 bob, then problem. That means now, I think the only solution is to boil the meat.
Okay.
You see,
Yeah.
he immediately starts changing his decisions, to fit the fact that now he can't afford the extra tomato.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hear you. Leonard, let me tell you, I did my budget and I was tired of the headache that I got. And Tita, you're saying you feel like you're in class. So am I. I hope you've learned something. This was just to give you perspective towards poverty, because many times we think poverty is just in the slums. Poverty affects all of us. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Leonard. Please do better with your organization. I will be keeping tabs to make sure you're doing better.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for making the time, and thank you to you for watching. Have a fantastic holiday tomorrow. Please go to work on Monday. Have a good night.